Hello, everyone. Welcome. For those of you who have joined us a little earlier, we're going to wait a few minutes before it reaches 1 o'clock, and then we're going to start. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Engaging EMS, Law Enforcement, Fire Rescue, and TMCs in Traffic Incident Response Week 2017. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items, so you know how to participate in today's event. First, a quick intro. The National Operations Center of Excellence is designed to offer resources to serve the Transportation Systems Management and Operations, or TSMO, community. The center offers a variety of technical services such as peer exchanges, workshops, and webinars, and ongoing assessments of best practices in the field. Check out the center's website, transportationops.org, which contains case studies, resources, and a calendar of TSMO-related events. About the audio, you're listening in using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and dial-in information will be displayed for you. You will have the opportunity to submit the text question to today's presenters by typing your question in the question pane of the control panel. You may send in your question at any time during the presentation, and we will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. A recorded version of this webinar, along with presentation slides, will be available on our website within 24 to 48 hours. Feel free to browse the entire collection of NOCO resources in our Knowledge Center. For those of you just joining us, welcome again. We are about to start today's webinar titled Engaging EMS, Law Enforcement, Fire Rescue, and TMCs in Traffic Incident Response Week 2017. With that, I will hand it over to Adam Hobbs, who will be moderating today's webinar.
Thank you, Nilu. Thank you to everyone who's joined us. Those who participated in our previous traffic incident management webinars, especially around traffic incident response week, you know that we're trying to focus on engaging every discipline that's involved in traffic incident response. So today we're going to take a look at fire rescue, law enforcement, EMS, and TMCs. Neela, if you could move forward on the slide. So we all know what the transportation challenges are and how traffic incident management is centrally involved in these transportation challenges. And I'll wait a second for that slide to come up. And we know that traffic incident management is essential to combating the safety, mobility, and environmental challenges that we all face. Traffic Incident Response Week is basically an effort to recognize the responders and the risks that they take in advancing traffic incident management and recognizing the role of traffic incident management in these larger transportation issues. Neela, can you go to slide 3? Perfect. This is what I was discussing about transportation challenges. And then on to the next slide. At the National Operations Center of Excellence, we work a lot with operations departments at the state, MPO, and local levels around various traffic operations strategies to combat these challenges. But traffic incident management, we know, is the backbone of so many traffic operations centers, which is why we've sort of applauded FHWA and their efforts for Traffic Incident Response Week, and our efforts around that week are going to be focused on how TIM affects transportation and traffic operations. So here's an overview of Traffic Incident Response Week for those who haven't seen it. There's a toolkit available on the TIM network site. I'll put that link in the chat box over here. And we will also include it on the NOCO website. We have a toolkit that's available that allows any agency from small or large to adopt a TIM week activity. There's different types of activities going all over the country, which we'll share here a little bit at the end. And there's a kind of a variety of ways, from simple DMS messaging to an actual event to a press release, all sorts of a number of ways to go about that. Next slide. So here's the dates that are up top: November 13th to 19th, 2017. You know, there's going to be a large focus on the increase of deaths for motorists and responders in 2015 and 2016. The goal that we've set is there to increase driver knowledge of state quick clearance laws and how to keep motorists and responders safe on the roads. And we're doing these webinars as an effort to kind of bring awareness about those. So there's been several in the past that are available for recording on the NOCO website, and then this one today, of course, to engage these various different communities. So thank you again for joining us. So we're going to hear from Randy Cockerman, Mia Gaynor, and Scott Yinger here about the various different disciplines, and it looks like Randy is ready to go. So next slide, Nilo, and Randy, you're up.
Okay, thank you, Adam, and thank you to Nilo. I'd also like to thank Chuck Yorks from the TIM program and Todd Lease from the Pennsylvania Turnpike for the opportunity to be here today. I have a presentation, so I'll just start in with that. Those who are not actively engaged on the highway on a daily basis may not understand the severity of the danger involved and the issues we encounter at each highway incident. It is a constant challenge to educate lawmakers, those who provide funding, sometimes even our own department administration, and of course the biggest challenge would be the public. Those of us who respond to highway incidents on a daily basis have a very real understanding of the issues and the need to educate others regarding those issues. In our fire department, most of the training centers on firefighting or vehicle rescue, with some training on safety for responders while working on the highway. In addition, as a combination department consisting of paid staff and volunteers, we have volunteer members who leave after a while and new members joining to take their place. And it's often difficult to get decision makers to understand the importance of highway training and to provide that training for new members. We are constantly working to make changes to improve our priority concerning highway incidents and the safety of our personnel at those incidents. And really, fire departments, at least in this area, they pretty much do whatever they need to take care of the highway situation. There's one fire department nearby that had all of their firefighters take a basic fire police course so that they could not only understand traffic control, but for the issue of liability. Another department that has few fire police officers, the fire chief actually took on the position of fire police lieutenant. The assistant fire chief took on the position of fire police captain. And I have to give them a lot of credit for that, because if they're not fighting fires, they take the traffic control responsibility so that they're providing the necessary services on the highway. So I think overall fire departments are doing whatever they can to make adjustments to take care of the situation on the highway. Our fire department provides service to East Whiteland Township in Chester County, Pennsylvania, which consists of a substantial residential population, corporate centers including the Great Valley Corporate Center, industrial and commercial, as well as heavy traffic on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, Route 202, Route 30, and many other highways and roadways. We also provide service to Charlestown Township, which is a more rural area with many secondary twisting and turning country two-lane roads. So our service is very diverse. Most of our emergency responses are for traffic accidents. A typical response to a traffic accident would include the ambulance, an engine equipped with rescue capabilities, and our traffic unit. The traffic unit operates within our fire police division. As we respond to the incident, we attempt to learn as much as we can from our county dispatch center so we can anticipate and plan for the work that we'll all be doing. The main priority at the highway scene is traffic control. And it's former New York City Fire Department Deputy Chief Vincent Dunn who stated, "You must have control of traffic before you begin any tactical actions at the scene." One of the safety procedures at the scene is blocking, which is provided by the engine normally to protect the crew and those in the action zone. Our traffic unit and fire police are responsible for setting up early warning signs, the directional arrow board on the traffic unit, and implementing temporary traffic control devices such as traffic cones, signs, flares, and traffic directing. We often receive assistance on busy Route 202, which is a 6-lane expressway with many twists, turns, and gradients, from the PennDOT Safety Service Patrol with their vehicle arrow board. And that does help a lot when they're there. In the event of a more serious highway incident, a fire police task force would be requested, bringing additional traffic control units from other departments. If fire is involved, this presents multiple hazards such as the immediate danger to motorists near the scene, smoke conditions that may impair visibility to other motorists, the arrival of support fire apparatus, such as tankers, and the greater risk of secondary accidents due to motorists wanting to see what is happening and what is on fire. In addition to the D drivers, speed is certainly a major factor concerning the safety of responders on the scene. And a new danger that we've recently noticed of errant vehicles. These errant vehicles are a serious concern to responders. For motorists who intentionally proceed around or sometimes through road closure barriers or traffic control devices. This seems to be a greater concern and something that we must constantly watch for. We have discovered the best form of protection at the scene is to block with as many heavy vehicles as possible. And just as an example, yesterday we had a road closed where we had live power lines down on the roadway. We had a road closed sign, we had traffic cones out, a vehicle there with a fire police officer, and a motorist made an attempt to go around that barrier, which it amazes me that they do that. And when that person was asked what they were doing, they said, I thought I could get through. So that's something new that we're dealing with, and we have to watch that very carefully. It is no doubt that the initiatives of traffic incident management do work and make our emergency scenes and operations safer and better organized. At every highway incident, our traffic unit and fire police stay until all responders are clear and off the highway. And a lot of times that includes the tow truck, the towing personnel who are there. The SHARP 2 Traffic Incident Management course has been presented at our department for our personnel, and we include information concerning TIM in our public relations and community programs. Charts and highway safety information is provided to our members as well. I asked some of our department members for their input and concerns regarding this webinar today, and here is just a few of those concerns. I feel better and safer knowing the road is closed when working at an emergency scene. The idea of moving traffic near the scene makes me more anxious and concerned. Another said, I feel that more training and education is needed for effective positioning when blocking for all fire departments. When I travel out of the area, I see many vulnerable places where personnel are in danger due to emergency vehicles not placed in the proper positions. And another said, I see many motorists so involved in their phones, even those involved in full-on typing and viewing their screens. It is dangerous enough doing this on the road, but even more so in a dangerous area at an emergency scene as they pass by. I have joined with our fire police captain, Tommy Cockerham, on a traffic incident management campaign, which we started in August of 2014, to bring attention of the dangers to emergency responders while operating on the highway. We've presented this issue on radio stations, in newspapers, in meetings, at public events, and on social media. Some of the results from our campaign have been an increase in public awareness, emergency responders being more aware of danger and taking precautions, an increase of responders wearing reflective safety vests, and a much better awareness of the National Traffic Incident Management Program. With the danger increasing on our highways and roadways, so must our effort to protect emergency responders and highway personnel, to continue TIM training and awareness, and to bring a greater awareness to the public in every way possible. As proponents, supporters, and advocates of highway safety and the National Traffic Incident Management System, we will do everything we can to continue this positive work, which can bring safer highways and benefits to everyone involved. Thank you again for the opportunity to be involved in this program today.
Randy, thank you so much. Thank you for that overview of fire and rescue and TIM. I do have a couple questions, but we'll wait to the end if that's okay, because we'll get moving forward. But thank you so much again. And for anybody who has questions, please feel free to use that question area and the GoToWebinar screen, and we'll get to those questions there at the end. So next up is, do Gia Gaynor, the Executive Director of the National Association of State Emergency Medical Service Organizations. Dia is going to talk about EMS and traffic incident management. So you can go ahead and move the slide forward, and Dia, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Adam. I'm delighted to be here today. I spent 12 years in the field as a volunteer paramedic and firefighter, and also bring the perspective of the state emergency medical services offices about the challenges that Tim presents to emergency medical services organizations. Those include ambulance services as well as other non-transporting EMS agencies that respond to highway incidents. This presentation on the EMS perspective, which is different than the fire and rescue perspective that Randy just covered, not just because the functions are different, but the ambulance service may be operated by an organization separate from the fire department. So for those of you who are in the transportation industry, I encourage you in your planning and training efforts to research who does what as it relates to EMS versus fire and rescue. EMS has a long list of traffic incident related tasks to execute, some of which are in common with our other public safety response organizations, such as getting to the scene in a safe and efficient way, overcoming road design and barriers, sometimes using the roadway in a completely different way than it was built for, opposing travel lane use, for example, or utilization of the shoulders as a means of travel. But EMS is particularly interested in the use of telematics data and understanding the severity of crashes and predicting the possibility of severe injury. Vehicle placement at the scene, as Randy pointed out, using a vehicle as a barrier is one consideration, but as it relates to the ambulance, the ability to exit the scene, often having the need to leave the scene first with a victim on board. Interagency communications and coordination are also a prominent issue. We still have many areas of the country where various public safety entities are on different frequencies and rely on their dispatch centers or third parties to relay information across and among those agencies. But then when we drill into the clinical aspects, which is very unique as far as emergency medical services are concerned, getting access to the victim, especially when they're still in the vehicle or in an unusual location such as down an embankment alongside of a roadway to assess the victim's injuries and providing patient care accordingly. This is complicated when extrication is needed and rescue, whether it's using the jaws of life or other means of access to the patient, which can delay patient care. Emergency medical services organizations also have a common practice of doing clinical consultation with the receiving hospital while they're still on the scene. This may be to get guidance about how to care for the patient. It may also relate to how to transport the patient, ground versus air, and or consultation about the appropriate destination for the patient. This is often a factor with pediatric patients where the closest hospital may not be the appropriate hospital. How to restrain the patient in the back of an ambulance for transport is a unique challenge that emergency medical services face. And this, again, is a particular challenge as it relates to pediatric patients and how to keep them safe during transportation. As well as I mentioned before, how to transport the patient and how ground, again, versus use of a helicopter and the use of the back of an ambulance to transport multiple patients for which it may not have been designed. And then finally, that transport destination determination and deciding which is the closest appropriate hospital, not just the closest hospital. Next slide. I'll also talk about some of the issues that weigh heavily on the leaders of local EMS agencies, as well as state EMS offices that are responsible for regulating local EMS agencies and their practices. The EMS occupational fatality rate is 3 times the national average, and a recent study published looking at 5 years of line of duty deaths showed that 86% of those EMS deaths were transportation related. That's either the ambulance being involved in a crash or EMS personnel being struck at a scene. There are, according to the CDC, and literally these data were just released in the last week and a half, studying multiple years of emergency department visits related to EMS personnel. They estimate that there are an average of 2,000 emergency department visits per year for line of duty related motor vehicle injuries in EMS personnel. One of the other issues that EMS agencies struggle with is responding to the scene. Should they go lights and sirens or proceed in normal traffic? And this is a complex issue that often relates back to the dispatch center capabilities and the dispatch center's ability to utilize earlier first responders, whether those are law enforcement personnel, fire and rescue personnel, or even highway incident personnel, to provide some preliminary assessment about the urgency of response. Utilization of systems to predict severity of injury is still a fairly limited practice in the United States, and/or it's limited to individuals whose car are equipped with proprietary telematics systems that may relay information about probable severity of injury back to the dispatch center. Whether the dispatch center conveys that information to the ambulance service, it varies widely across the United States. And as I mentioned about the utilization and placement of the transport vehicle, especially when it's a ground ambulance, and the at least anecdotal reports of ambulances being trapped by other emergency response vehicles where they might be last in but need to be first out, especially with a severely injured patient. As the last bullet indicates, getting to a trauma center for severely injured patients makes a big difference in patient outcome, where a 25% lower death rate occurs when a severely injured patient is taken to a level 1 trauma center versus a conventional hospital. I did mention the challenges of pediatric restraints, largely related to the fact that none of the available pediatric restraints for use in the back of an ambulance have crash test standards associated with them. So we're concerned that we are not securing those patients safely for that ride to the hospital. And then last but not least, the utilization of a helicopter, which with some exceptions where some systems have created designated landing zones adjacent to roadways, the roadway may be the only safe landing zone, leading to road closure, which we know is a significant challenge for local and state transportation departments. Next slide. I think looking ahead, as far as opportunities are concerned, the TIM training program has been approved for use as continuing education by the National Registry of Emergency Medical Technicians, and this makes it a very appealing course for those EMS personnel to take. And furthermore, FHWA is currently seeking accreditation from the Commission on Accreditation of Pre-Hospital Continuing Education in order to award specific continuing education credits for states' purposes in addition to the National Registry's purposes. But we do see limited evidence of involvement of state EMS offices as far as the rollout of the TIM training initiatives with their counterparts in the state transportation department and state law enforcement agencies when planning TIM. And I would just offer to the audience members who work in the transportation environment that if your desire is to get to every ambulance service in your state with announcements or notifications, your state EMS office are the only means of reaching every licensed EMS agency in every state. And I'll show you an example of why we're kind of concerned about whether we're involving, on the next slide, if you go ahead and advance, whether we're involving the right people to advertise the TIM training opportunities, is that we estimate that there are about 825,000 EMS personnel in the United States, EMTs, paramedics, and levels in between. And about half of those are estimated to be fire-based. So we respect that the fire-based EMT or paramedic may have called themselves fire rescue in the second row. But the fact that less than 5%, or only 13,000 out of what we think are about 400,000 non-fire EMTs and paramedics have been trained to date is a serious shortcoming. So I'd like to use this opportunity to convey that EMS personnel are organically interested in protecting themselves at motor vehicle and highway incidents, but we need to do something better or different to make sure they're aware of those training involvement opportunities and get involved. That concludes my overview.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's fantastic. We try to always make sure that we get the perspective of EMS, and again, the NOCO and working with FHWA is going to make that training component for EMS a part of our efforts during Traffic Incident Management Week, so thank you for calling that out. Next up, we have Scott Yinger, who's the Field Operations Chief with Maryland's CHART program. We've heard a bit from Maryland's CHART program and other webinars on traffic incident management, so we're excited to have another expert back from Maryland, and Scott's going to talk about TMC and law enforcement perspective. Before I turn it over to Scott real quick, there are some questions coming in. Feel free to continue with those. We will have time to ask those of our presenters after we conclude, so feel free to use that question box. Scott, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Adam, and I'd like to thank Chuck Yorks and our director, Joey Sagal, here for the opportunity, as well as the National Center of Excellence. Dia, I share your concerns about safety at traffic incident scenes, and there's my contact information should anybody need any more information from me. I'm here at Maryland Department of Transportation State Highway Administration Office of CHART. We specialize in traffic incident management here in Maryland. I'm here almost 6 years now after a 27.5-year career as a Maryland State Trooper. As a trooper, I did some time in our training unit, spent most of my time in the field as an accident reconstructionist, working out of local state police barracks, doing shift work, so I thoroughly understand what law enforcement is faced with. And I can only say this after being in transportation for 6 years. I wish I would have known then as a trooper what I know now. Transportation seems to take somewhat of a back seat to the other responder disciplines. I've noticed that when I've been present at scenes now as a transportation official rather than a uniformed state trooper. And with that, again, I wish I would have known then what I know now. I may have done things differently. Next slide, please. So, traffic management responsibilities, and you know, a lot of states, a lot of local jurisdictions, counties have traffic management centers. They monitor highway operations, road work, maintenance. There's a myriad of sensors out there, weather, speed, road condition sensors. They monitor weather, and anything to do with managing and operating the roadway system they're responsible for. So they are kind of the clearinghouse and the eyes watching what goes on out on the road. They're tasked with detecting and verifying any incident, non-reoccurring congestion that may occur that affects the transportation system, the road transportation system. They provide messaging for lane closures and queue warnings, and that's something that the other disciplines need to know. You know, to contact your traffic management center, they can provide you a margin of safety that you didn't have before by warning traffic as it comes upon you through their dynamic message signs, through highway advisory radios. They generally have an advanced traffic management system, which is a clearinghouse for all statistical and information that has to do with the roadway system, incidents that occur on those roadways. They document every event that occurs and the significant changes to those events. A lot of times that information is analyzed by an academic authority to determine the effectiveness of that traffic management center and how efficient the roadways are, which correlates to a business case in savings of dollars to the taxpayers when you have a robust traffic management system. And all the responding disciplines are key players to the entire picture of traffic incident management. What else do? They inform travelers, they make notifications. So when the responder disciplines notify the traffic management center, notifications and alerts go out immediately to media outlets, to social media outlets. It could be to Google Maps, it could be to Waze, as well as traditional media outlets, and that helps inform travelers to take a different route and keep that traffic queue from building up and reducing secondary crashes. They notify other response partners, maintenance personnel, should there be guardrail damage, roadway damage, should they need to have different barricades, set up barrels, whatever they may need, as well as leadership personnel. And they also, if you have safety service patrols in your jurisdiction, they'll dispatch and communicate with safety service patrols to get them to respond to help secure the scene, as well as signal techs, ITS, intelligent transportation systems technicians, bridge inspectors, and the like can respond as well. So they have those responsibilities. Next slide. So some of the issues they face, and I found this through both careers, that receiving timely and accurate information in a traffic management center, for all the reasons that I mentioned in their responsibilities, very important to get the word out, inform the motorist that there's a problem ahead, to prevent secondary crashes, potential for injury, and to give a proper detour route. Limited intelligent transportation system coverage. A lot of traffic management centers have cameras, so they can video the roadways. They don't typically record, but they can watch the roadways. They have detectors out there. Sometimes those systems fail, and sometimes those pole cameras don't cover 100% of the road. We in Maryland, and I know some other states, have mobile cameras on our safety service patrol trucks. They provide some of that coverage in those gap areas, but not all roads are covered by intelligent transportation systems, so there are some gaps there. Systems maintenance and updates, certainly a lot of software systems, hardware systems need maintenance, the items out on the road, all the devices need to be maintained, they need to be upgraded, and that is a challenge at times because sometimes those maintenance things, you're in the middle of maintenance when an event happens, and that can be a challenge. We have communications failures. A lot of these systems have hard lines to them. They can fail. Cellular communications can fail. The equipment can fail, and that can be an interrupted time, and it's always that camera or that device that you need to see that's not working at the time, even though it's temporarily being maintained, that would give you the best view or the best information about an incident. Traffic management centers are really busy. They got a lot of things on their plate and managing multiple priorities, a lot of work zones going on, a lot of construction areas that they monitor, make sure that people have permits to be out there and they're out there at the right time, or contractors, managing incidents, the normal reoccurring congestion during rush hours, and they may have special events. And right now I know on the East Coast, we're monitoring hurricanes, and that's another event that we continue to monitor in our traffic management center, which kind of splits up the duties. And did I mention receiving timely and accurate information? That seems to be the biggest challenge of a traffic management center, is making sure that information comes in so the information can go out. Next slide. Now, law enforcement. It's an interesting, my career in law enforcement, I do find that law enforcement responds to all crashes, not as far as discipline goes. Only in personal injury crashes will you get EMS, fire rescue. Property damage crashes may not even include calling for a tow truck, but law enforcement responds to all crashes when they're required to respond. But it may be incidents that don't take all the other responder disciplines. So they have a myriad of responsibilities, whether they're in a unified command at a personal injury crash or a complex crash, or they're in simply an incident command situation where they are the incident commander and they're by themselves. Some states, it is designated who is the incident commander by law or statute, and most states it's not. So at a personal injury crash, it becomes a unified command. But law enforcement responds to all crashes. Can be local, county, state. Obviously, they need to arrive safely. do a windshield size up of the crash and verify for other responders as to what they have, secure the scene, perform first responder duties if they happen to arrive first, or at least before EMS arrives, establish incident command, unified command, and traffic control, and ensure that there's appropriate access and egress for other responders that may be coming. And again, law enforcement may not be the first there, but a lot of times they are. Their duties include, once they get to the scene and get it secured, to secure witnesses. That's always not the easiest thing to do. Identify involved parties and preserve the evidence at the scene. Very, very important for incident responders to understand that mission. You shouldn't go moving things. If a person or a victim is wearing a seatbelt, it would be important to cut that seatbelt rather than unbuckle that seatbelt. Make note of at least mental note of where people are, where you found them, or maybe what they said, because a lot of times it's hard to gather those witnesses as and even victims, and account for victims as the process unfolds. They need to conduct an investigation. So through this, they identify the causes, hopefully, and they will take the appropriate enforcement action. They coordinate. Most law enforcement agencies are the coordinator for the tow services that need to arrive. They have approved lists. They have contractors they call to come and bring the appropriate tow services. That can be a challenge at times. They document all elements of the crash accurately for court presentation should enforcement action need to be taken, and for future engineering analysis to determine if the roadway or what conditions may have contributed to the crash. So lastly, they present evidence, their findings in court, for accountability for the at-fault drivers, hopefully to correct behavior that driver won't cause that same crash again. So that's kind of the responsibilities of law enforcement at a crash scene. Next slide, please. So what challenges do they face? Well, when it comes to setting up traffic control, cars are getting smaller and smaller, and it's harder to carry temporary traffic control devices that are seemingly adequate. Flares seem to be, consumable flares seem to be the device of choice, although LED flares are becoming more and more popular. But space for cones or something that's MUTCD standard, like a 28-inch cone, just will not fit in the new SUVs and the new trunks of sedans. So they have limited space for adequate traffic control. Fire trucks are now being required to carry cones on their trucks. You have safety service patrols. There is some assistance there to relieve them of some of that responsibility. A lot of their duties, and they have many, many duties at a crash scene, typically, it's not unusual to have a single police officer carry out all these duties by themselves at a crash scene, and they have very limited personnel. And quite frankly, some of these opportunities they have are time sensitive. Time to identify the driver, ask permission to get a tow truck for their vehicle as they're getting loaded into the ambulance, trying to gather up witnesses while they're there, and again, destruction of evidence. Witnesses, I don't want to get involved, I'd rather leave. They give inaccurate statements. You're trying to sift through all that while you're trying to grab vehicle information. And that doesn't even include if there's criminal activity involved. The driver of a vehicle has had too much to drink, is under the influence of drugs, alcohol, or the like. There's some criminal activity afoot. The car's stolen. There's weapons in the vehicle, drugs, and that's a whole different course and several layers of more complex investigative police work. And that's even a simple crash scene. Then you get into the complex crash scene, commercial vehicles and fatal crashes. These things these type of crashes cause specialized investigative units to be notified, respond. It takes time to respond, whether it's a commercial vehicle, federally approved inspection team that needs to come out and look at commercial vehicles. Accident reconstructionists, causation analysis may need to come with their special equipment to map and diagram the scene accurately with 360-degree scanners or total stations. Very specific and very accurate devices they use to map the scene. Notification medical examiner's office. I would suggest in other states that is a discipline that we have brought in here in Maryland to our training. It has been a very good aspect to get their side of the story and what their mission is and what their parameters are, and get all the other disciplines to understand that the sooner you notify them, the sooner they will respond and can make arrangements to remove the deceased from the scene. They can be a very big player. Thankfully, fatal crashes are the small percentage of crashes, that we respond to, but they can be the most time-consuming events because of all the investigative resources they take. All these other, the complex crash scenes, the fatal crash scenes, the criminal activity may add other reports that need to happen. These complex crashes often cause law enforcement out to consult with their local states or district attorneys' offices for any kind of advice, search warrants, how to gather information and what they can and can't do. Notification, of course, they need to make to executive leadership about what the status of the case is, the investigation is, as well as we have scenes where they're complex, they're major, and the press shows up, and the press would like to interview the police officer about what occurred. So there's a lot of that as well, as far as talking to the media at the scene and the public information, getting public information involved. Tow service efficiency and response can be a little bit of a challenge, but working with your tow agencies, local through law enforcement, they can smooth those out. But typically, you know, that it may take a while to get a tow truck through the queue to get there, so call them early and often. Next slide. So in Maryland, last year was the first year for the Incident Awareness Week nationally. It was widely successful. We did put together something here in Maryland where we located a stretch of roadway between our two major media markets, Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland, and they did attend. We involved state, local, and federal partners, all from public safety. We identified some champions from each responder discipline to give a quick speech, 3 to 5 minutes. The media was there. We provided media opportunities, and a mock crash scenario where we had a state police car that was at a crash scene, was struck in the rear. It was a scene of an overturned tractor trailer. We discussed with the media the risks at being at an incident scene and the complexities of recovery of a commercial vehicle. So they did a demonstration for us there. Again, widely successful, bringing a lot of attention to the move over law and to the safety of incident responders. Next slide. So we're looking at Traffic Incident Response Week this week, and that's November 13th through 17th. And on the 15th, we're going to have another event here at a rest area on I-95 that'll use that as the backdrop to bring attention and focus again to incident responder and motorist safety, as well as Maryland's move over law. We're going to do a dynamic message sign safety campaign during that week, putting up on our overhead signs about the move over law. We have a standard campaign with our Highway Safety Office, who should be engaged in your traffic incident response weeks. It is a collective and mutually beneficial mission that we have here regarding safety. We're going to coordinate and include police, fire, rescue, EMS, towing, and DOT from around our area in Maryland and other states regionally to be involved in this. The media will be here. We're going to set up to do some ride-alongs the week before to lead into the event, as well as the day of the event. Ride-alongs will be with law enforcement and our safety service patrol to really hear from the drivers and police officers who actually do the job about the risks about standing out on these roadways to do their business day in and day out, and how they manage that. We've identified a central location again this year to get both major media markets from Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. We're going to conduct another mock crash and develop some public safety announcements for radio and television during that week. It's really, really a good opportunity to bring this to the forefront in your areas, in your disciplines, to get involved in this week, to really get the message to motorists to move over, to slow down, to pay attention, and to have regard for the incident responders out there. And I think that's all I have. Again, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Thanks for both the overview of what you're doing in Maryland, and then also for continuing to honor Traffic Incident Awareness Week again in 2017. It's great to hear what Maryland is doing. So I want to give attendees a chance to ask any questions in the question box there. We do have a few that are in there. Before we get to questions, and as you're typing those in, Neela, you can advance to the next slide. I just wanted to kind of say, you know, what it is that we want all of you to take away from today. And, you know, first we want the takeaway to be that traffic incident management is an essential discipline to managing our transportation system, and it involves responders consistently putting their lives on the line to keep the transportation system moving and to save the lives of those involved in incidents. that's first. And second, we want you to consider bringing awareness to traffic incident management and honoring these responders by participating in Traffic Incident Response Week. Maryland outlined the extensive activities that they're doing November 13th through the 19th, but any events or activities that you're capable of doing would be a contribution. And please feel free to work with us and Chuck Yorks again at Fleming for ideas or assistance or coordination, whatever we can help with. And then lastly, if you're already doing great work in the area of TIM, or even holding an event during TIM Awareness Week, please let us know. We want to feature the good practices that you're doing to benefit the needs of others who are looking to improve their TIM programs, and we want to feature any events and that you're doing during TIM Awareness Week as well. So I'm going to move on to questions here for the next 5 or 10 minutes. First, the ones that came in, I'll go by order that came in here. So Dia, the first two are for you. Can you share what specific telematics data is being used for EMS and how this will add to action? Dia? Looks like we might have temporarily lost Dia. So as she jumps back on, I'll jump to...
I made it.
Oh, hi, Dia.
I made it. You might have to revoke my mute certification.
Sorry about that.
Very limited telematics data is reaching the first due EMS agencies today. Certainly some proprietary telematics systems are using their human operators to manually dial a 10-digit phone number to reach what they think is the correct local 911 center in the vain hopes of relaying a yes-no probability of severe injury to the EMS agencies. We're finding some challenges and obstacles in getting 911 centers, and there's 6,000 of them across the United States, to actively relay that information. We hope someday that as a product of emerging intelligent transportation systems technology, that somehow that can get right into the digital device of the crew member riding in the cab of the ambulance, so they can see that information well before they arrive at the scene. There are several important logistical and operational considerations if they know in advance prior to arrival about the probability of severe injuries.
Thank you, Dia. The other question was, where are we at, or the possibility of getting patient info to the emergency room on the way to the hospital?
That is a more promising practice that is occurring largely in systems that are using on-scene patient information capture, patient care reporting systems that are already linked to the destination hospital. And in fact, some of the more sophisticated systems, although they're not in widespread use throughout the United States, can actually alert the hospital about the patient's severity or unique conditions that the patient has, such as being grossly overweight, or a pediatric patient, or other special considerations, such as this patient wasn't just in a motor vehicle crash, they had a heart attack as well.
Great, thank you, Dia. For those who haven't yet, feel free to add other questions. And a point, I have a couple of my own, but I wanted to recognize a point that came in from Dave Bergner about acknowledging the transportation discipline's importance in TIM activities and roles. And he mentioned, of course, that 70% of the roadways in the U.S. are under the control of Department of Public Works, and often Public Works is forgotten, and that is absolutely true in this discipline. I think the chart that Dia used earlier that showed the discrepancy of training, certainly among EMS, also highlighted that Public Works also is in need of perhaps additional attention and training. We actually did a webinar that covered that. I'll post that in the chat box area, but thanks for bringing that point up. So a question for all three of you, and I'll let Dia go first, and then Randy, and then Scott. What's the biggest challenge you have in instituting TIM training procedures in your discipline, or what do you think is your discipline's biggest challenge in instituting TIM training procedures, or is there one specific aspect of it that's difficult to institute? Yeah.
Thanks, Adam. From an EMS standpoint, I think it's twofold. First of all, something Randy brought up, which is the prevalence of volunteers in the EMS environment, especially in suburban and rural and frontier areas. They are already burdened with home and jobs, and on the side are contributing to their communities with their skills. And to layer another 8-hour class or another 4-hour in-person interagency practical session is quite the challenge. The second is awareness. Our hypothesis is that local EMS agencies are not aware of the TIM training, especially when they are not fire department-based services.
Thank you, Dia. Randy?
Yeah, Adam, I would have to agree exactly with Dia. Like I said before, the main thing with us is the training. We have volunteer members. Some of them stay for a while and leave. Others stay for a longer time. But that training is so important, and it's just so difficult to get that training along with all of the other training that these firefighters need to have. And there's a lot of it, and they need to be recertified, so they're constantly attending training. And I would say that's the biggest problem for us. And as well, getting the word out to the public, which is something that we just have to constantly work on.
Thanks, Randy. Scott, any thoughts on that from either law enforcement or transportation side?
Yep, a couple things come to mind. It seems as though in the public sector we get more and more responsibilities to handle with less and less staffing, and we get spread pretty thin, and it becomes a real issue to try to find the time to get the training in. Especially for instructors to teach the training. A lot of agencies aren't paying overtime for that, and it's hard to work that in because a lot of times they're at minimum staffing levels already. That seems to be a problem. In law enforcement world, there's a priority shift. I've heard from law enforcement partners today that traffic is kind of taking a back seat to other things that are going on in the law enforcement community right now with society that are taking a precedence to traffic, so therefore it's not from the executive leadership side getting the attention unless your law enforcement agency is solely focused on traffic. So a couple things there.
Thanks, Scott. Two more questions that I have, and again, if anybody else has questions, please feel free to put them there in the question box. I don't want to cause any virtual fights here by talking about interagency collaboration between fire, EMS, and law enforcement. But I kind of wanted to ask what the challenges are in interacting between the various groups. I know this was discussed quite a bit in the big push for the Sharp 2 TIM training about 10 years ago, and Dia brought up the major issue of communication, interoperable communications. Are there other issues that you see as continue to be a challenge that needs to be improved on? Again, Dia, I'll let you go first.
Well, I think the TIM training program itself has illustrated how infrequent interagency, interprofession, interdisciplinary training occurs at the local and regional level. There certainly has been sort of a focus on disaster-related efforts for the last 10 years, but what you can do on disaster day is based on what you can do day to day. And I think that's really the key point there, that these organizations are not accustomed to planning and training actively for day-to-day type incidents. And I also want to observe that the well-stated point about law enforcement being sort of distracted to other demands of society, such as the opioid crisis, and how maybe it is or it isn't the most pressing need in any given community, but have all of the organizations with any type of public safety response sat down together to talk about it as a whole. I think that's the big challenge.
Randy, any thoughts on the challenges of interaction between agencies?
Sure. The biggest concern would be communications. I certainly wish we had better communications between the units responding to the scene. A lot of times we don't have that. If we did, it would make things a lot better. One benefit that we do have is a great working relationship with our police departments, other fire and EMS departments, so we're very, very fortunate to have that. And I know that Scott mentioned that sometimes the police officer or state trooper is there by themselves. So when we arrive there, they're very glad to see us, and it just works very well with us helping them and them helping us. So the communications, I'll say, would be the biggest problem that we would have.
Thanks, Randy. Scott, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and you know, it comes down to a lot of an incident scene of not only who's in charge, but who's in charge of what. And I think ideally, this Sharp 2 4-hour incident responder training in a multidisciplinary setting allows an opportunity for each discipline to explain their goals, their mission, their priorities, and others understand that, begin to nod and say, I get it now. Not out on the roadway, but in a training setting. In some states, it's various jurisdictions even, it's local jurisdictions, it's even clearer by statute who is in charge. And it takes that right out of the picture as to who's going to run the show. And there's always pockets in every area where there's going to be two people that don't get along for some reason, and they bring this to the forefront in the worst of places, which is at an incident scene. Thankfully, that is the exception, not the rule. I think the training goes a long way to preclude that from happening.
Thanks, Scott. Great thoughts there. So I'll get everybody out of here on one last question. Dia, starting with you, what's the major advance in the next 5 years for your discipline in the realm of transportation response?
I would have to say it is technology and applications that drivers and vehicle occupants can use to alert responders about their underlying medical conditions and sort of opting into systems of letting emergency response personnel know, as well as technology that I think could easily be deployed in the next 5 years to safeguard EMS personnel operating at scene, like warning of a fast approaching vehicle, et cetera.
Thanks, Dia. Randy, major advance in the next 5 years that'll improve your discipline?
I think the biggest thing would be to get the message out to the public. And I know here in Pennsylvania, there's an effort to get signs posted on our major highways, slow down, move over, and to get motorists to understand why they need to do that. And I think that's the main thing that we have to work on. And also training, which is a constant thing that we have to have. So getting the message to the public, I think, would be number one.
And Scott, we'll end with you. The major advance coming in the next 5 years for either transportation or law enforcement.
Yeah, a lot of things coming fast and furious here. You're seeing manufacturers develop vehicles that are connected. They're connected to each other, vehicle to vehicle. They're connected to infrastructures such as signal boxes. There's more and more coming. The manufacturers are driving how fast this is going. Governmental agencies are having a hard time keeping up with how fast that technology unfolds. You know, law enforcement, crash investigation, I talked about 360-degree scanners, total stations, but the use of unmanned aerial vehicles to map a crash scene within 5 minutes rather than 50 minutes to open the roadway. Those kind of technologies are coming as well. You're going to start to see transportation system use strategies such as ramp metering, variable message speeds, hard shoulder running, express toll lanes, a lot of those things, queue protection that we haven't seen before. So those technologies are out there. It's coming more and more to the forefront as vehicle miles traveled goes up, continues to go up, and the technology continues to spread through the automotive industry.
Thank you so much. So there we go. The deployment of technology and communicating more fully with the public. I think we have our takeaways and missions going forward. Thank you again to Randy, Dia, and Scott for talking about this extremely important topic. Again, if any of you want to engage more around TIM Responder Week or your TIM program or what you're doing, please feel free to reach out to the National Operations Center of Excellence, to any of these speakers, to Chuck Yorks of Gannett Fleming and FHWA, who's leading the TIM Awareness Week efforts, and we'd love to work more fully with you. Neil?
Thanks, Adam. Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. A recorded version of this webinar along with the presentation slides will be available on our website within 24 to 48 hours, so stay tuned for that. On behalf of the National Operations Center of Excellence and our presenters, thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.